It is near impossible to recount in their entirety the events that took place within the garden, but alas, I will try. My words are quite different now than they were then and there, so I am not able to fully relay the garden's beauty and magnificence. The curse has long since soaked into my veins. The place that previously existed within my mind, a place where I could take in and turn about the wondrous images of the garden, has been corrupted and dimmed. My name is Adam, and I have lived 737 years since the fall. In all that time, I have come to fully realize the extent of what was lost. Not in the sense that I can recall anything that happened before, but in the sense that I have forgotten. And in this lonely state of forgetfulness, I find myself yearning for memory. For truly beyond the flaming swords, there lies something worth guarding, something most magnificently withheld. After long years of concentration, both myself and my wife Eve have come to many conclusions. I find it useful to record what we remember, so that many lifetimes after we have passed, the reality of what was lost in the garden may still remain potently fragrant in the lives of all our descendants. Without further preface, I bestow upon the listeners of these words my most fond of recollections, based upon a gathering of inferences. Eden, the garden where I was formed. The air was crisp and cool, refreshing my lungs as cool water brings relief to a parched throat. It consisted of more than substance. It held some sort of emotion. A contagion of joy was borne upon it. I walked, for that is the closest description of the way we moved in the garden I can conceptualize, through forests of purple and blue, of yellow and red, a red more pure than the rich blood of a fattened calf upon the altar of our Lord. All around me there shone an abundance of light. Each place my eyes darted, they were greeted with warmth. The Father's radiance shone down upon me. Every once and again a bird would soar overhead, singing songs of praise unto the Creator. I'd name them all, the creatures with whom I shared the garden. I'd venture into the fields to find the sheep lying with the lions in a bed of flowers, and while peering upon each group of flowers, I'd remark to myself how beautiful they were, and whisper grateful utterances towards my Father. I'd lie down upon soft grass, brushing the tips of each feather-like blade with my fingertips. On one occasion, I grew curious as to just how it was that the grass stayed upon the ground, and so I took a bunch of grass from the ground in my hand and gripped it tightly, pulling the blades upward towards the sky. With a tear, they released themselves from the damp soil below, and I could see just below their violet and orange bodies what I now know as roots. I examined these roots, smelled them, and upon tasting them, I was filled with another sense of rejuvenation, a bit stronger than that of taking a breath. It was understood in the garden that everything was shared, from the air we breathed to the very bodies we inhabited. It was I, man, who was to oversee the sharing of such things, as the caretaker of my Father's garden. And so I went on to name each animal, giving each its own respective title, serving as a way to call upon them, in times when communication was needed. Whereas before they were named, they simply existed. Now I could call out bird, and along would come a bird and perch right atop my shoulder. In this way I manifested a sort of control over these creatures my father, Abba, had not created in his own image. Although this type of bonding was all good and well, I felt there was something missing. The garden was more than sufficient, and yet I lacked something vital: companionship. I kept it to myself for quite some time, but when it grew unbearable, I brought it up in one of my many discussions with Abba. "Look there, what have you called that one?" Abba pointed. "That one is Rabbit," I replied. "Rabbit, yes, this is most pleasing as it comes off my lips. Rabbit." He laughed warmly. I chuckled as well as we went around repeating that word, rabbit. There was something to speaking, something that affirmed the essence of what was being said. Abba spoke the word into existence. Each and every living thing around me, all that had existed, had been affirmed. The essence had been granted existence. In allowing me the task of naming the animals, Abba granted me the same sort of authority over the animals as he had over the universe. Because I had affirmed them, I held a certain power over them. After we finished laughing, I looked into his eyes and I told him what was on my heart. "I am lonely, Father." "Ah, yes, I have seen how you stare off into the distance, thoughts racing through your mind. You imagine what it would be to be one of two instead of simply yourself. I can give you what you need, Only promise you'll be surprised when you see her." He winked. Her, I thought. What could this mean? I hesitated, then spoke. "Yes, Lord, I promise to be surprised." I smiled at him and we both laughed as he took me around the shoulders and pointed to a squirrel, asking what I had called it. It was some nights later that I had a dream. I was me and I was in the garden just as it had been before. I'd closed my eyes for sleep. But there was something different. Yes, it was the sky. The many colors were swirling together in some sort of whirlpool motion. The center of this mystifying aura hovered not a few feet above my body. As odd as it was, I felt compelled to remain still. And that's what I did. I lay as still as if I were sleeping, and I was. The colors were amazing, and they seemed to grow brighter and more vibrant as they closed in about my body, and soon I found myself suspended just above the soft spot of grass I'd made my bed. I breathed in, and my body was filled with light and warmth. This wasn't air, it was life. My entire body glowed with each inhalation, growing with intensity as my breaths grew shorter and faster. It was as though I were a gargantuan firefly caught dangling in an invisible spider web. But the spider wasn't here to suck the life out of me, or inject me with poison, but rather to fill me with more life. I could see the forming from within the colorful swirling spectrum what looked like a hand, each finger bending gracefully toward my chest. Then with a push it was in and through the soft skin, wiggling through the bone and latching on. With a crack in my rib was ripped from my body, but I felt no pain. The vortex above receded and I was placed gently upon the ground. When I awoke, I started in surprise. Feeling my chest, I noticed a new cavity that hadn't been there before, and beyond this new discovery there was something even more magnificent. My eyes fell upon the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in the garden. This must be her. I thought. She had hair much longer than mine, and her skin shone golden brown like honey in sunlight. I walked a bit closer and bent down just before her. Brushing the hair from her closed eyes, I observed the gentle rise and fall of her body as she took in for what must have been some of the first times the magnificent life-giving air. I reached out my hand and placed it upon the sleek indentation of her stomach. She was warm and soft. A few seconds passed, and then, with a start, she awakened and stood to her feet. Her eyes darted from me to the sky to the ground and then back to me. Where is this?" she asked. "It is here," I said. "It is now." "Who are you?" she asked, her face contorting. I wonder if I looked the same way when I asked questions of Abba. "I am man," I smiled. "You must be her. I think you should be called Eve, the first of all women formed of man." "I was formed of you?" she questioned. "If my dream and this cavity in my chest mean anything at all. Come, there is much to see." I dragged Eve all around the garden that first day, showing her what I'd named and what still needed naming. My loneliness quickly dwindled, and I found myself enjoying her company more and ever so much more. We laughed together, danced together, and enjoyed the bliss of the garden together. It was as if I'd just been created again and was experiencing all the wonders around me for the first time, only through the eyes of Eve. We were one, her and I, the same. After some days of playing together and showing her around, we were visited by Abba. He looked more solemn now than ever before, but in a way that was still warm and amicable. "Hello, my daughter Eve," he said, and Eve, just as I'd done the first time I saw him, ran toward him and embraced him. "Abba," she exclaimed, for truly just upon looking upon his face you knew in your heart who he was. His presence overwhelmed you with joy and peace. "You like her well, my son?" I was surprised. I smiled. He laughed for a bit, but then his face turned back to that look of somberness, and I knew I should listen to what he would say next. "Come, my children, I have something to show you." "What is it, Abba?" I asked. "Yes, what is it?" Eve repeated. "Patience, patience. It is just ahead now. Follow me." And so we followed quickly behind him, moving closer and closer to the center of the garden. This was one of my favorite spots, covered in trees with ash-white bark. They were only found here in the center, whereas the trees dotting other parts of the garden were that of many colors. The pale nature of these trees gave them a feeling of being more holy and pure. They were set apart from the others. Their leaves shone a crimson red and seemed to pulse as they danced on the cool and gentle wind. We continued in silence until we came upon a clearing. There in the center stood two massive trees, the trunks of which spanned what must have been 50 arms lengths, if not more. They reached up quite high into the sky, so their shadows could be seen for quite a distance. What was odd in their formation was not their unusual size, but more the way their branches curled down from far above and made several little arms hanging just above the ground. On each branch there were several hundred little orbs of magenta and of turquoise, of scarlet and of violet. They were little fruits. I immediately rushed forward to grab one, having eaten other fruits of various trees throughout the garden. No! Abba placed his hand on my chest and stopped me in place. The word resounded with me. I had not heard it before, but I knew what it meant. The tree there, with the red bark, he pointed, that is the tree of life. See how it throbs and pulses? The tree had amazed me at that moment, here in the garden, but now, upon years of reflection, I realized that it was much resembled a beating heart, its red body pulsating bright and red, and along its bark there ran a fluid much like blood, which pooled at its base. It was beautiful in its own horrific way. And this here, with the black bark, said Abba, this is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Eat from it, and you will certainly die. Die, I said, the word a couple of times. It is a word you shall not come to understand, lest you break my command. Eve looked at me, then back to Abba. We'll never eat of the tree, Father, as long as we live. She grabbed my hand and pulled me along, skipping through the white trees with red leaves. It was in that moment that I realized she didn't understand how fearful she should have been of that word, die. I don't even know if I knew. I couldn't have known. Abba smiled as we went on like this. Some days passed, if days be what they were. Time was a little fuzzy in the garden. A day could be like 1,000 years, and likewise 1,000 years could feel like a day. Sometime after we had been introduced to the trees, I found myself alone at one of many ponds where the fish swam in circles. There were trees nearby whose limbs hung just over the pond so as to create a mirrored forest. I enjoyed this image very much, and so I spent much time here. Deer often came to the edge of the water to quench their thirst. There was one there then. It had a white fur, and as Eve approached, she pet it as it darted away. Hello, man, she smiled. Hello, woman, how was your stroll? It was most peaceful, and how was your observing? Very well, I have called that one there fish. I pointed to the scaly creature in the water. This is most suitable. Come now, shall we gather fruit? But of course. We walked the same path we usually traveled, the one which led around the trees of both life and knowledge. There were several trees along the way which contained many ripened fruits. I went my way and she went hers, so when we came together again, we could surprise one another with what new fruits we'd discovered. This time, however, I found I'd lost her. Woman, I called out, but she was nowhere to be found. After searching for some time, I found myself in front of the massive trees in the center of the garden, and there she was, speaking with what appeared to be a serpent, as I'd come to call them. I approached her from behind, and when I met her side, she was startled. Adam, you must try this fruit. Look, it is perfectly fine. The serpent has told me so. She held out a ripened red spear with one bite-sized piece of it missing. Seeing how she had touched and even eaten the fruit and not ceased to be, I took it in my hands and ate of it. I could feel the juice throwing through my veins. It was like nothing I'd ever tasted before. My eyes shot open wide, and I saw that there in front of me stood Eve, fully naked, just as I myself was naked. She screamed in embarrassment, and we both ran our separate ways, gathering fig leaves to make coverings for our nakedness. When we had finished covering ourselves, we came together once more. What have we done? I asked. We now know what is evil and what is good. We are exposed, she replied. In the distance I could hear the father walking in the cool air, as he often did. He called out, Man! Man, where are you? I grabbed Eve's hand and pulled her into some brush that had grown nearby. Quick, we mustn't let him know we've taken of the fruit. He mustn't know we've disobeyed. It was near impossible to hide from the father, and soon enough he found where we lay covering. Why have you hidden yourselves? He asked. I heard you approaching and I hid because I was naked. Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I forbade you to eat? The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it. What have you done? Eve spoke out. The serpent deceived me and I ate. Turning around, Abba found the snake and cursed it to crawl around the ground. All at once its arms and legs fell clean off and it slithered away. Then he turned to Eve and cursed her to have pain upon bearing children. Then he turned to me. His eyes met mine, and I cringed, tears streaming down my face. Cursed is the ground because of you. It will produce thorns and thistles for you until you return to it. We were then clothed in garments of animal skin, and the Lord left us. I looked at Eve, and she at me, and I could see the tears streaming down her face. I held her close to my chest to give her comfort. She was mine, and I was hers. This is how it was to be. Suddenly, a loud crashing erupted from just beyond the row of red trees in front of us. A flame of epic proportions swung high into the air, up into the quickly darkening sky. As it swung back down, I could hear a loud and piercing shriek, the likes of which I'd never heard before. I threw my hands to my ears and fell to the ground, as did Eve. With another crash, a face appeared from among the trees, those of which immediately surrounding the most hideous of creatures burst into flame. It had brows of ash and eyes of deeper red than any I'd experienced thus far. Its arms and legs were like the trunks of the great trees, and it smelled of burning flesh. It approached us rapidly, swinging about its flaming sword, and not a moment more it was joined by another just as great, just as magnificently awful. So we ran, Eve and I, her hand in mine, until at last, our feet bloodied, we reached the end of the garden. Our feet were created by coarse bits of sand, hot and dry, and from the sand there sprouted rapidly many thorns and thistles. So to move forward was to embrace pain, a feeling we'd not yet experienced. But to return would be to die, to cease to be, as I now understood it. So we pressed onward, until we came upon a place where we could rest, a cave. We collapsed, legs and feet bleeding out, and fell into a deep sleep from which we would awaken into a very different and desolate existence.